And to help us sort all this out, a little perspective from former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, who ran for the Republican nomination in 2012, and Stephanie Cutter, who was a top aide with President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. Now, Mr. Speaker, how does it look different this year than when you ran in 2012?
Oh, I think it's totally different. First of all, when the top four candidates on the Republican side are basically bunched at 12 or 11 or 10% in New Hampshire, there are no frontrunners. In fact, you might even say they're just walkers. I mean, there's nobody out there right now who's got anything like a strong lead. Jeb Bush will raise a lot more money than anybody else, but there's no evidence that that's automatic. In '08, John McCain was broke and got the nomination. In '12, Mitt Romney had a huge amount of money and got the nomination. We have no idea which year it is, and we have no idea what's going to happen.
So, Stephanie, on the Democratic side, is Hillary Clinton going to face any real challenge? You heard Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders makes a good case for his cause.
Yeah.
Whether the country is ready for that, I think, is another question.
Yeah.
What's your take?
I think that it's pretty likely that Hillary Clinton is going to be our nominee. Do I think that Senator Sanders has a role to play? Absolutely. And I think that Hillary Clinton believes that also. He made a very strong case. And he'll influence the debate. But in all likelihood, he has not made a viable case for his candidacy.
Well,
and I
here's
think that
the
matters.
thing. Can a person who is the overwhelming front runner at this part of the campaign, I mean, my God, we're a year and a half from the election. Mr. Speaker, can that sustain?
Oh, I mean, if you're asking me, do I think Senator Secretary Clinton can be nominated? Yeah, there's no guarantee it will be sustained because there are things that happen and there are patterns that build. But it won't be because she hasn't. If she doesn't get the nomination, it'll be because not Hillary beats Hillary. It won't be because some candidate beats Hillary. And we don't know how all these different fights are going to work out. But if you were betting today, you'd say she is the overwhelming favorite to be the nominee.
I absolutely agree. I think that there's nobody in the race right now who presents a real challenge to her in terms of taking the nomination away. But it's important to remember, and we've been through this process many times, that we are many, many months away from the nomination, never mind the election. And there's going to be lots and twists and turns. On the Republican side, certainly, there is no front runner. We saw in 2012 that there were something like 5 or 6 front runners by the end of that nomination process. So anything can happen, and we're at the very beginning stage of this. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch, particularly on the Republican side.
Sheldon Adelson kept your campaign alive, at least for a while there, because he poured a lot of money into your campaign. Do you see either of you, any kind of a backlash coming? Because it looks like now we're going to have these super PACs and the system's going to be totally overwhelmed by big contributions.
Well, I think, first of all, if they tend to be countervailing. That is, Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton, can raise easily enough money to match Jeb Bush. So you're going to see huge volumes on both sides. And I think there's a declining value when you get above a certain number. The key for a candidate, which I failed, was to get above a critical mass. If Romney could only have outspent me 3-1, I might have become the nominee. But there's a point at somewhere between 5 and 20-1 where you drown. Nobody who's a nominee in the general election is going to get outspent by a huge number, because the country's too polarized on what kind of future it wants, and both sides can generate huge amounts of money.
But why would people not become cynical when they say, well, his billionaires, he's got more billionaires than my candidate? Where does all this end?
Well, I do think they become cynical, and I think what Newt is saying is that in the general election, both sides are going to be competitive, but at a certain point, all of this negativity and money thrown into the system begins to cancel each other out, and people start tuning it out. And it does promote cynicism. We do need to figure out how we take action to get this money out of the system. And I will say that Secretary Clinton did come out for a constitutional amendment to take this private, special interest, secret money out of the system.
And she also announced she was going to form her own super
which is
PAC.
very similar to what President Obama did in 2012. Don't want to fight with one hand behind your back, and I think that's fair.
What's this campaign finally going to come down to?
Well, I would recommend to everybody in both parties that they read Tony Blair's essay today in The Guardian. Blair, who rebuilt the Labor Party in a 5-year project that finally paid off in 1997, and the only major labor victories have been with Blair in the last 40 years. or 30 years. So I think it's well worth looking at. What he says is pretty straightforward. If you look to the future, you have a huge opportunity. If you emphasize ambition as well as compassion, you have a huge opportunity. If you emphasize new technology, you have a huge opportunity. But if you retreat, and I'd say this for both parties, if you retreat to the past and you go to the extreme in either party, you're going to isolate yourself from having a chance to win.
What's your idea of what this
Well,
campaign
I
is
couldn't
about?
agree with that more. I think elections are always about the future, and I think that candidates who are espousing policies that want to take us back, either culturally or in terms of civil rights or economically, are going to have a real problem.
Yeah, one other thing about Cameron's victory is very interesting because there were columnists writing stories about what Republicans should learn from the conservative defeat the morning of the vote, and then of course the conservatives won, which made their columns sort of weird. The number one thing that Cameron did was he emphasized working Britons. And I'll give you an example that will be probably controversial. A party which goes into places like Ferguson and Baltimore and says, you know, it is the working African American who was hurt by the riot. It is the working small business African American and Latino American and Asian American who was hurt by the riot. Somebody ought to stand up for the people who are trying to create a decent future. That party is going to start a debate that's really important for this country between those who want to work and those who want to disrupt and destroy. And I think that's a very important debate for the next year.
I'll give you the last word, about 30 seconds. Will foreign policy play a role this time?
Absolutely. I think that is an issue that's bubbling up in this race. We saw a lot of Republicans talk about it yesterday. I think the real issue is whether or not anybody can really distinguish themselves on foreign policy, particularly if you're running against Secretary Clinton. You know, we heard a lot of rhetoric yesterday with Republicans in South Carolina about finding and killing terrorists, but no real policies, no real differentiation compared to what Secretary Clinton or President Obama will do. So
All
we'll
right,
see.
we have to go. Thank you both. We'll be back with some personal thoughts on what could be another big issue, Deflategate.